The Bureau went so far as to mail anonymous letters to Dr. King and his wife, which were mailed shortly before he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and finishes with this suggestion. King, there is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. You have just 34 days in which to do it. This exact number has been selected for a specific reason. It has definite practical significance. It was 34 days before the award. You are done.
MLK was assassinated by the United States government. And I think this may actually shock you. It actually shocked us as we began to look into it. First off, let's play the clip. MLK's family member saying that MLK was assassinated by the U.S. government last night on Tucker Carlson Go.
I would like to say that, first off, it's important to acknowledge that it is Martin Luther King Day, and nothing should detract from his radical vision, Tucker. And he was assassinated by the U.S. government. You've talked about JFK's assassination recently.
Yep.
This was in the same period. And he was assassinated right when he was escalating from talking about racial bigotry to class and in the war in Vietnam.
I noticed.
And my cousin picked up that mantle and proudly, and I'm a very proud member of the Scott family. So I was rather upset to see that statue, to be honest with you.
Well, you make a good point that no one ever says out loud, but he had shifted to populist economics. I have no idea who killed Martin Luther King, but it's very obvious it was not James Earl Ray acting alone. He had 2 foreign passports. He was escaped from prison. The whole thing is ridiculous.
Scott did not expound, reading to you here from Mediaite, who covered this, Scott did not expound upon the claim, while Carlson said it was very obvious that Ray did not act alone in the killing of King. Ray, meaning the man James Earl Ray, who was convicted of killing Martin Luther King Jr. But does this story take a fascinating turn? So let's talk about the empirical and demonstrable evidence as it surrounds Martin Luther King Jr. and his life. Martin Luther King Jr. was a civil rights champion and was the primary agent of change agent for the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, one of the most consequential bills in American history. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words are emblazoned on the Lincoln Memorial. There's a large bronze plate where he stood to give the I Have a Dream speech. I have a dream that my children will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. What a wonderful dream to have. Now, many people have many differing opinions on Martin Luther King, and that kind of depends on, which people's history you read, right? However, there is absolutely no one who should be able to disagree with that statement alone. That is sort of the crystallization of our founding in this country, that all men are created equal. In 1964, Civil Rights Bill gets passed. Martin Luther King, what did he do after 1964? That bill was signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson. And then what happened next? Well, what happened next was that Martin Luther King did actually get into advocacy for class. He got into advocacy for the downtrodden and the working class. And he began to really question the United States government's involvement in Vietnam and in greater espionage, and began to agitate other social movements. You may disagree with them. You may not like them. But I tell you what, it didn't mean that every one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s civil rights needed to be shredded and torched by our own federal government, which we know for a fact. As Tucker Carlson says, we're not sure who killed Martin Luther King Jr., but we know this. Somebody killed his civil rights. And ironic, since this is the man who authored and was the key agitator for the Civil Rights Bill, he himself was the one who was having his civil rights destroyed. Do you know that our own federal government sent Martin Luther King Jr. a suicide letter telling him to kill himself? This is real, ladies and gentlemen. The FBI suicide letter, reading to you from far right-wing conspiracy theory site Wikipedia. FBI suicide letter for Martin Luther King Jr. The FBI suicide letter, or blackmail page, was an anonymous 1964 letter packaged by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, they admit to this, meant to blackmail Martin Luther King Jr. The suicide letter was part of the FBI's CONTELPRO operation against King. Well, what is that? First off, let's dive into this. On November 21st, 1964, a package that contained a letter and a tape of recordings of allegedly King's sexual indiscretions was delivered to Claretta Scott King, the wife of Martin Luther King Jr., and later to King. Although the letter was anonymously written, Martin Luther King Jr. correctly suspected that the FBI sent the package. Claretta Scott King said the tapes comprised only of mumbo-jumbo. The letter did not specify what action it is urging King to undertake. King understood the letter was advocating for him to commit suicide. Although some have suggested that it was merely urging him to decline the Nobel Peace Prize or step out of leadership. Nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, the FBI was... Okay, so this is real. The FBI was sending a letter to Dr. King around the time that he was murdered, telling him to kill himself. Now, this was part of a CONTELPRO operation. What is that operation exactly? Let's pop on over and read a little bit about the CONTELPRO FBI operation. CONTELPRO, which is a syllabic abbreviation derived from Counterintelligence Program from 1956 to 1971, was a series of covert and illegal projects actively conducted by the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic American political operations. The FBI records show that CONTELPRO resources targeted groups and individuals the FBI deemed as subversive, including feminist organizations, Communist Party, anti-Vietnam War organizations, and Black Power movements, along with the Civil Rights Movement, including Martin Luther King Jr. They spied on Martin Luther King Jr. They did this at the directive of J. Edgar Hoover, the long-time serving FBI director, who issued the directives governing the CONTELPRO operation. He used FBI agents to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of movements and their leaders. He wiretapped Martin Luther King Jr.'s phones. This is, of course, illegal. He had no right to do this. This continued, by the way, for many years, the FBI's harassment of Martin Luther King Jr. This is something that is not up for debate. This happened. And the FBI sent MLK a suicide letter urging him to commit suicide around the time that MLK was killed. What's that about? Very curious. We're just asking questions. I think it's very important. Final thing, the CONTELPRO methods. They include infiltration, psychological warfare, harassment via the legal system, illegal force, and undermining public opinion. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Like, for instance, what they are doing to the MAGA movement? What they do to various individuals who trespass on January 6th, or perhaps what they do to Donald Trump on a daily basis. Ladies and gentlemen, old dogs and old tricks. Why mess with a system that works? The illegal surveillance, of course, is something that is still ongoing via our federal government, and something that leads to the very, very curious case of the man who supposedly killed MLK, a man named James Earl Ray. So James Earl Ray was a very odd individual, and much like Lee Harvey Oswald, has a deeply disturbed and peculiar background that doesn't make any sense at all. Let's breeze through it really quickly. James Earl Ray is the man convicted of assassinating Martin Luther King Jr., but there are some very, very curious things about his life. For instance, he had escaped prison. He was a career criminal, escaped prison, moved to Mexico, then moved to Canada, then moved back to Mexico, had undergone a rhinoplasty to change his appearance. Nobody knows exactly why. Then he traveled the Deep South. He was a racist. He was a supporter of George McGovern's presidential campaign. And people say that he's the man that shot MLK inside of a Nashville hotel. Inside of a Memphis hotel. On April 4th, 1968, Ray allegedly killed Martin Luther King Jr. with a single shot from a Remington rifle. King was standing on a second-floor balcony at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Shortly after the shot was fired, witnesses saw Ray fleeing to a rooming house. Okay? So they apprehended the guy in London, actually. This man had then, after allegedly shooting MLK, this man traveled to Canada, traveled to Portugal, traveled to London, and then they apprehended him with multiple passports. They extradited him to Tennessee. He was charged almost immediately, never went to trial. He admitted to killing MLK, and then recanted his confession 3 days later. 3 days later, Ray recanted his confession. He had entered a guilty plea on the advice of his attorney to avoid death by execution, which would have been possible with a jury trial. Ray is on video, actually, recanting his confession, saying that it wasn't him who killed MLK. More importantly, Ray was able to escape from prison again in 1977. What? Remember, he allegedly killed MLK after escaping another prison, broke out of prison. And then members of MLK's family actually reached out to this man. In 1997, King's son, Dexter King, met with Ray in prison and asked him, "I just want to ask you, for the record, did you kill my father?" And Ray replied, No, I did not. Dexter told Ray that he, along with the rest of the King family, believed that Ray and the family also urged publicly that Ray be granted a new trial. That trial actually aired. It was a mock trial. And during the mock trial, Ray was acquitted. This leads to interesting articles here in the History Channel saying that MLK's family actually doesn't believe that this was the murderer of their father. Why Martin Luther King's Jr. family believed that James Earl Ray was not his killer. After the assassination, King's family did not trust the findings of the FBI, which had harassed the civil rights leader while he was alive. There's also video evidence of Ray saying that this was a conspiracy and that he was being used very much as a patsy, which were the exact same words that Lee Harvey Oswald said when he was taken into custody for the killing of JFK. Watch.
So you heard the news on the radio? Is that the way you heard it? So you were driving. You left that gas station at 2nd and Linden. What, about 6 or?
I don't have any way of knowing. I think it's around that time, but I don't even know if it's Linden. I know the approximate area it is. And I've seen the map on the Enquirer.
And you were going back to pick up this man that you say is Raul?
No, I just waiting the car back.
So you heard all this confusion, flipped on the radio, they said Dr. King's been shot. Did you think you were set up at that point?
No, I was headed toward New Orleans when I had the radio on. I used to keep the radio on. I think I didn't have too strong feelings about the shooting.
When you met Raul, you didn't know any other name for him. That's the name that he said was his, and that's all you ever knew.
Yeah, I did. Just know.
And you met him where?
Canada.
Up in Canada. Yeah. And you just met in a saloon, or?
It was a saloon in the waterfront area of Montreal.
You never became good friends then?
No, I wasn't good friend. Just business. These were all aliases, I assume.
You don't think Raul was a real name at all then? Huh?
No, I've got some Freedom of Information papers in there saying there's a Raul San Diego or something in New Orleans. It's supposed to be a...
So that's footage. You can go find that footage. It's in the National Archives. And that was published by the Washington Post, by the way. Super right-wing sources we're citing here. Wikipedia and the Washington Post. Super right, definitely the InfoWars of media. No, these are leftist sites. These are government apparatchiks sites. These are Prague leftist news that is openly admitting this. As the History Channel, I read this article to you. In a few days after confessing to murdering of MLK, Ray began to claim his innocence, arguing that he had been set up by a man he knew named Raul. It was Raul, Ray said, that directed him to buy a gun and binoculars and rent the room across the street at the hotel. Ray said he wasn't in the room when King was shot. He was unable to consistently explain where he had been. But it's not clear if Claretta Scott King, the widow of King, believed Ray's innocence. Immediately after her husband's assassination, MLK's wife suspected that the FBI who had investigated the murder was involved in the murder. There is abundant evidence of a major high-level conspiracy in the assassination of my husband, Martin Luther King Jr., Coretta Scott King said at a press conference in 1999, according to the King Center. It was a theory that she maintained until her death in 2006, not too long ago. That has never been proven, mainly because, well, the FBI would have to investigate itself, and we all know how that works. Yet, given that how the Bureau had treated her and her family, her suspicion of the FBI and its conclusions about her husband's killer came to a very reasonable place, says John McMillan, history professor at Georgia State University. Well, well, well. That is what Tucker Carlson is getting at when he interviews a member of the King family last night on his show, and that member of the family says the government killed my uncle, Martin Luther King Jr. That is the evidence. We don't know who killed Martin Luther King Jr., but what we have just presented to you is direct evidence of the FBI asking MLK to kill himself, sending him threatening letters, recordings of MLK inside of hotel rooms, other surreptitious recordings that they recorded illegally as part of the CONTELPRO operation. They had spent years harassing, tracking, surveilling, and spying on this American citizen, and they had done so because they believed that he was a political threat to the power establishment. That's why. And to her dying day, Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife, who is survived by numerous other family members, who you could see on Tucker Carlson last night, to her dying day, Coretta Scott King said that it was the FBI. That's what we know. What do you believe?
Thank you for watching. Our channel's here to meme the libs until they cry and then to meme them crying. Their tears, they taste just like sweet, delicious ice cream. Salty, too. We ridicule the establishment and the libs because of you. Your support keeps us going. So if you like what you saw, please punch the subscribe button, click like, and ring the little bell so that you know when we're live. Don't you want to know when we're live? And make sure that you subscribe to our email list just in case the plug gets pulled, as tends to happen. If you want to see more of our videos, click here or here. My name is Benny Johnson. Stay free, base patriots.